Hello, chị Ngân ơi, we should start now and welcome everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, my name is Nguyen. Welcome to the webinar today. And this is my pleasure to be the moderator of the session today. Vietnam Workforce Compliance Review 2026, Tax, Payroll, and Employment Updates. As you know, we have a lot of updates this year to work on. So before we begin, so I'd like to take a few minutes to introduce about briefly about the webinar, about the Ascentium, and so for those who may not know, I am Ngan Nguyen, the head of Hanoi branch for Ascentium Vietnam. This month marks a remarkable milestone of Ascentium Vietnam as well as the Ascentium Group. So last week on the 13th of August, we officially launched the Ascentium Vietnam brand at our rebranding ceremony in Ho Chi Minh City, which was attended by distinguished guests, clients, partners, and our friends from our business community, the Business Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam. So thank you all for attending the ceremony for our Ascentium Vietnam. Ascentium Vietnam is under Ascentium Group, headquartered in Singapore. And we bring together the capabilities across multiple markets, countries in Asia, Europe, UK, American, and beyond. So as you can see on the screen, so we have the Ascentium Group companies here. Well, we used to be in Corp Vietnam, but now we rebranded to Ascentium. So you can also see other companies under the group as well. So for our existing clients and partners, our commitment remains the same, like providing practical and local expertise and hands-on support, no matter where we are in the group. You can see also in the screen with our global footprint. So at the moment, we have a presence in all over the world, not only in Asia, but also in Europe, UK, and even and Middle East as well. And we also have branches in America. So wherever you are, we can also support you. In Vietnam, so let's say our services cover broader services for you in not only in Vietnam but also in Asia. So including business intelligence, HR, payroll, corporate advisory, recruitment and staffing, tax and accounting, IT and ERP. Not only the services on the screen, but also we can support you from very tailored advisory from legal perspective and also from HR payroll's perspective too, as we are going to focus on the topic today. So before we move to the speakers, well, let me briefly walk you through today's agenda. So as you see, the topic of the day is the Vietnam workforce compliance in 2026. So for the employers, managing employees in Vietnam is no longer simply about hiring people, recruitment, but and also not simply processing payroll, right? So the companies need to keep up with the updates, with the changes from the governments and also from the business perspective as well. So this can become particularly challenging for foreign invested companies, not only in Vietnam, but also in Asia. For the FDI companies, multinational businesses, and employers who are growing the workforce in Vietnam and planning to have the business in Vietnam. And for that, we bring together experts from Ascentium Vietnam, Jack Nguyen, the CEO of Ascentium, and Ms. Sarah Galeski from Tilleke Gibbins and Gibbins, the Counsel, to discuss latest regulatory developments, practical compliance, consideration, and so on. So please, together, welcome Jack as the first speaker of the day. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Ngan. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this afternoon's webinar. Quickly about myself before I go into the slide presentation. I'm the CEO of Ascentium Vietnam. I've been in Vietnam now for the last 14 years, and I've been head of other companies operating in Vietnam, Vina Capital, at TMF, and at Mazars. And I've spent over 25 years working in Vietnam, Canada, and the United States, and I have a CPA background both in Canada and in Vietnam. Next slide, please. Right. So this afternoon, my presentation, I'll be focusing on latest changes that affect the labor regulations as it relates to personal income tax, as well as updates on talent hiring in Vietnam and the mobility of hiring foreign workers in Vietnam. There were a number of regulatory changes in the past 6 months, and all of them became effective July 1st of this year. So I'll go through a few of them and highlight what the new changes are and how they impact you. Um, so the first one has to do with tax on personal income tax, a simpler, more generous personal income tax framework. Secondly, are incentives offered by the government for companies to hire talent from outside Vietnam, and we'll go into detail what these incentives are. And then we'll talk about mobility, Decree 219, that are intended to streamline work permits, exemptions, and support for short assignments in Vietnam. So we'll go into more details in the latter slides. Next slide, please. Right. So these are the three recent regulatory updates as they relate to personal income tax and mobility workforce hiring in Vietnam. So December 10th, 2025, Law 109/225 QH15 was introduced, and it was meant to replace the previous PIT law and its amendments. The provisions in this law concerns business income and employment income of resident individuals, and it's effective 1st July 2026. And then the second new law that came into effect was introduced in June 30th, and it became effective right away the next day, July 1st, and it was Decree 253. And this provides more detailed regulation implementation for a new PIT law, including taxable and tax-exempt income, deductions, withholding declarations, and administration. And then the third major regulatory changes has to do with Circular 87, which also came into effect July 1st, and it's meant to streamline the work permit TRC process for certain individuals that are prioritized for employment in Vietnam. Next slide, please. Right. Okay, so the PIT reform reduces the tax burden for many employees, and this is a significant change. And again, it's already effective since July 1st. And we're talking about personal and dependent deductions. Okay, where in previous regulation, the personal deduction came in at maximum at 11 million, but under the new regulation, it is now up to 15.5 million for personal deductions as it relates to dependents. And for dependents, you can now deduct up to 6.2 million for each dependent, which is higher than what was before at 4.4 million. And then who qualifies for the dependent? The income threshold for what's defined as dependent is now increased to 3 million income threshold, which is higher than the previous threshold 1 million. So anybody with income up to 3 million can be defined as dependent, eligible for deduction for you. Okay. And the other major changes has to do with the progressive tax bands. There used to be up to seven tax bands, um, tax brackets, but now it's been reduced to five tax bracket. Okay, the top tax bracket remains at 35%, and that's for individuals who makes 100 million dong a month and above. Okay, and then the lowest tax band is a 5% tax rate for individuals who make monthly income up to 10 million dong. And then you have the successive steps of 10%, 20%, 30% tax bracket, depending on how much monthly income you make. Okay, so there's narrow tax bands now. It's five tax bands compared to seven previously. Okay, so again, these are all effective 1st July. So if you are doing C and B for your employees, if you're doing comp, please make sure about these latest regulations, and you need to calculate accordingly based on the new regulatory changes that have come out. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so with any new PIT regulations that came out, and again, this is already effective, so you need to refigure your payroll system for the new deductions. Okay, if you haven't already done so, you need to do it now because it's already become effective since July 1st. And then you need to recalculate the 2026 year-end, year-to-date personal income tax for your employees and identify any potential under or over withholding for adjustments based on the new regulations, especially as it relates to dependent deductions and the tax bands. And then you need to communicate all these changes, especially to employees as they impact your individual employees. You know, their pay slips monthly may change once you implement these new tax changes, and you want to make sure that you communicate them clearly to your employees so they understand what the new regulations are and how they impact the monthly pay slips that they get. And then you want to make sure that any changes that you make, you have you're documented clearly so that employee declarations, dependent records, and supporting documents are available and ready for any tax reviews and inspections later on down the road. Next slide, please. Okay. Yeah. So, so the Vietnamese government are launching a number of initiatives to attract talent into the countries, and there's two major initiatives going on right now, and one are different from the other. The first one I want to talk to is about talents that Vietnam wants to attract as it continues to implement It's International Financial Center implementation. As some of you are aware, Vietnam has launched two international financial centers one in Ho Chi Minh City and one in Da Nang. And with these financial centers, they clearly want to attract talents. So for the for talents that they want to attract for the international financial centers, whether these are managers or experts, scientists, or highly qualified people, these individuals are eligible for personal income tax exemption up to 2030. So that's a very big incentive. So whenever they start working in Vietnam prior to 2030 and up to 2030 each year, they don't need to pay any personal income tax. Okay, so that's a very big incentive offering by the Vietnamese government to attract these talents. Okay. And then secondly, on the right side, on the public sector scheme, uh, Decree 258 talks about attracting scientists and experts in international integration, supporting foreign affairs and strategic international integration capacity. So for this, the government offers up to 300% monthly salary support. So it's another incentive scheme offered by the government, and this is not a general private sector expat incentive, but it's more for government public sector scheme. Okay. Next slide, please. Right. So going back to the International Financial Center scheme, IFC's incentive change the talent proposition. So again, 0%, zero personal income tax if you qualify up to 2030. Okay. The exemption is time limited up to 2030, and and compensation modeling should include the post-incentive position as well. So after 2030, then these individuals will need to pay income tax. So as an employer, you need to model your gross to net savings, but keep immigration, social insurance, treaty, permanent establishment analysis separate. Okay. So what you need to do is make sure you do your calculation mapping properly for your employees as they benefit from the exemption up to 2030, and then do use proper calculation when the personal income tax calculations are impacted after 2030. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. So Decree 2019 talks about mobility and workplace. As most of us here who are expats have worked in Vietnam for a number of years. Going through the work permit process at TRC can be challenging at times. Decree 219 is meant to ease some of those challenges somewhat. Um, so the Decree 2019 governs the management, employment, and work permit regulation for foreign employees working in Vietnam. So this replaced Decree 152 previously. And first, this is meant to streamline administrative and labor market testing procedure. It's a single process. So foreign labor demand justification and work permit application are handled in a more integrated procedure, whereas in the past it was more it was more many procedures to get that done. Now it's more integrated. Secondly, managers or expats who are in Vietnam for short assignments, especially if it's under 90 days, that falls outside the scope of requiring a work permit. So that, again, makes it easier for experts who work in Vietnam, not needing a work permit if you're in the country for less than 90 days. Um, you see. Uh, Broader pathway, there's exception qualification routes for expanded or clarified high skill talent. So the government has a number of exemptions that are allow if some of the employees satisfy some of the high skill and priority sector talent. For example, whereas in the past, the government would require someone to have a university degree and 3 years related experience. Now could be less than 2 years related experience to qualify for these easier pathway to get TRC residence permit in Vietnam. So Decree 219 makes it a little bit more um, uh, easier to get work permit and related TRC, and the requirement to get these documents are less uh, are less restrictive than before. Uh, so these are positive moves by the government to attract talent and experts into the country. Next slide, please. Okay. And speaking of talent and crime and what's available in Vietnam, there's actually a mismatch of what companies require in terms of talent and the talents available. A recent survey of companies found that 45% of companies plan to expand headcount by 5 to 10% in 2026. But 80% of these companies report major difficulty in finding the right candidate, the suitable candidate that they are looking for. So 80% of companies, of employers cannot find employees with the right skill sets that they are looking for. On the other hand, 70% of the workforce survey are actively looking for new opportunities, making a move, but they cannot find the right employees to satisfy what they hope for finding a new employment. So there's a mismatch in the market right now of skill sets, of what employees are looking for and what employees are capable of. Some of the hiring hotspots right now in the market is in IT and AI, semiconductors. These are hot trends in the market and high demand for the right skill workers. Also advanced manufacturing and automation, and in commercial functions as well. So what employees are looking for is to hire candidates with demonstrable skills and the right experience to fill out these employment opportunities. Next slide, please. So the whole mobility journey as an employee, you need to carefully plan it out, track it out, and make sure that you're following the right regulations when it comes to role and the cost, how that employees will enter Vietnam under the visa or work permit route, and the whole process of onboarding the employees, making sure that they have the right labor contract, payroll, tax registration, opening a bank account, and ongoing, uh, you know, ongoing declarations of tax, personal income tax, dependents, and providing evidence, and then making sure that the employees are doing their tax finalization at the end of the year. So it's a whole journey for employees and employers, making sure that each of the steps are in compliance with local regulations. Next slide, please. Right. So this slide's quickly, is a reminder for employers to make sure that, you have a 30-day readiness plan where you map out, your employee needs, and you recalculate sample PIT outcome, test dependency, making any adjustments, and assigning owners, reporting and schedule quarterly cross-functional reviews. So these are minimal control sets for payroll, dependent document register, mobility calendar, doing TRC work permit, quarterly reconciliation as it relates to employees that you are onboarding. Next slide, please. Okay, so the opportunity is real with these new regulations for PIT reform, incentives to attracting talents coming to Vietnam and making sure that your employee coming into Vietnam are fully complying with local regulations in terms of work permit, the residential TRC, and any PIT declaration that the employee needs to do. The temporary residential card is very important, and that you make sure that all documents are lined up and properly documented before applying for TRC and then a work permit. Next slide, please. And with that brings the end of my presentation for this afternoon, and I hand the webinar back to Ms. Ngan.
Thank you, Jack, for such insightful presentation about PIT, about tax incentive in the workplace. And with significant changes in 2026, especially for the three significant changes such as PIT, tax incentive. Also, we have to apply e-labor contract. So we are hoping that all of the employer can comply the new regulation for the employment. Right, now we would like to introduce Ms. Sarah Galeski, the counsel for Tilleke and Gibbins, who will be the next speaker of our webinar today. So over to you, Sarah. I would like you to introduce about yourself and the firm, please.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
First I'll just introduce a bit about Tilleke and Gibbins. We're a regional firm. We were founded in Thailand in the 1890s, and we have a presence in both Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi, and also throughout the region. So in Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, and we have an IP office in Indonesia. We're a full service firm, but we don't provide tax advice. That would be the only item. And about myself, I'm a Canadian trained lawyer, but I've been in Vietnam 13 years now. In Canada, I was a commercial litigator. And in Vietnam, I've focused on labor and employment. So we can continue on. All right, so today, the updates I'll focus on are about salary, electronic labor contracts, extended maternity and paternity leave, and employee consent under the Personal Data Protection Law. Okay, salary-related updates. Next slide, please. All right, so the statutory base salary has increased. And if you're not familiar with this, the statutory base salary is like the absolute baseline for public employees. But it's relevant to all employers because this is how the ceiling is determined for social and health insurance contributions. So before July 1st, it was 2.34 million, and now it is 2.53 million. Next slide, please. So the effect this has is it's raised the contribution rates for social insurance and health insurance. The ceiling is determined, it's 20 times the base salary. So before July 1st, it was 46.8 million per month. So that's like roughly 1,800 US. And from July 1st, now it's 50.6 million per month, which is roughly 1,900 US. Next slide, please. So what this really means is that payroll costs have increased for both actually employees and employers. If your salary exceeds the previous cap, now each month you'll be paying a bit more. From the employer side, they will also be contributing more. So employers contribute 17.5% for social insurance and 8% or 3% for health insurance, and employees contribute 8% for social insurance and 1.5% for health insurance. On the upside, employees will receive higher payouts for the welfare benefits. So for example, for something like maternity leave, previously a female employee would only get roughly 1,800 US per month, but now she would get closer to 1,900 per month. Next slide, please. Regional minimum wage has also increased. This change happened actually a while ago, January 1st of this year. And you may be aware, I'm not sure, but Vietnam is divided into 4 separate regions for the purposes of regional minimum wage. And the idea is that a different minimum wage applies depending on the level of economic development of the region. Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi are in region 1, that's considered the most developed area. So it has the highest salary. And if you look at the rates, they've increased on average about 7%. Next slide, please. Okay, now we'll move on to electronic labor contracts. So actually January 1st, Decree 337 came out, which officially recognized e-contracts as having the same legal validity as a paper labor written contract. From July 1st of this year, now e-contracts must be connected with the National Electronic Labor Contract Platform. This is managed and operated by the Ministry of Home Affairs. And the systems that employers have need to be managed by a licensed e-contract service provider. Next slide, please. So in order to use electronic contracts, the employer must first ensure it has, of course, its required business licenses, enterprise registration certificate, or investment registration certificate. The legal representative also has to have valid ID documents, because this is the person who can officially sign the labor contract on behalf of the employer. And the employer needs to engage a licensed e-contract service provider. This type of entity needs to have a license for the provision of trust services, and it also needs to be able to ensure secure and stable application program interfacing so it can connect to the platform. Employees need to have valid ID documents, and both the employer and the employee must have valid digital signatures and access to time stamping services. And just a note, in Vietnam, to have a certified digital signature can only go through certain providers that are Vietnamese-based companies. So some examples are NPT, -CA, Viettel.ca, FPT.ca, or CMC.ca. So a company like Adobe Sign would not work, or a DocuSign also would not work. Okay, next slide, please. So as I mentioned, as of July 1st, e-contracts need to be launched on this National Electronic Labor Contract Platform. And there's a 24-hour rule. So within 24 hours of the last person signing, it has to be connected to the national portal. Once it's on the portal or the platform, it will be assigned a unique 13-number ID. And then anytime that contract is amended, or if it's terminated through a mutual termination agreement, all the related documents need to also be placed on the portal, and they will have that same unique 13-number ID number. Next slide, please. It's still possible to use paper contracts. Under the new regulations, it encourages the maximum usage of electronic contracts, but paper contracts have not been abolished. There's no legal requirement to re-execute or convert previously signed contracts. So you can keep your paper contracts in a paper format, and conversion is optional. And there are different considerations that I'll cover shortly as to whether you want to switch to e-contracts. Okay, next slide, please. So there's advantages and disadvantages of switching. If you switch to e-contracts, there's definitely more convenience, speed, transparency. There's no question about the contract being lost. It can be signed anytime and anywhere. Easier management and storage. Employers are obligated to keep labor contracts for 10 years under the accounting law. So if you have a huge workforce, it could be extremely inconvenient keeping them in paper form. You'd have to maintain all these filing cabinets and so on. So if you use e-contracts, you would not have that concern. There's time and cost savings. So if you are signing a paper contract, you need wet signatures, and then the corporate seal needs to be applied. And then generally, the contract would have to be couriered between the parties. The legal representative of the company might be out of town, so you have to courier from overseas, could be very inconvenient. But on the other hand, there's some disadvantages to switching. There could be data security risks. It's possible that a hacker could hack into the system, resulting in a data breach. There's fraud risks. There could be identity fraud or impersonation. And the main risk is that there will be easier scrutiny of compliance by the government. So everything will, like all these e-contracts, must be connected to the national platform managed by the Ministry of Home Affairs. And then the Social Insurance Authority and the Tax Authority would also have access to these contracts. So they can easily cross-check and make sure that the employer is making the necessary withholdings and contributions. Next slide, please. If an employer does decide to convert their paper contracts to an e-contract, it's possible. Basically, the parties need to have their identities authenticated. So they need to get digital signatures and they need to have identification documents that I was mentioning before. And basically, the parties would re-sign an electronic contract that contained the same content as the original. And then they would go through the same process as a normal e-contract. So they would be launched on the portal. Next slide, please. Okay, now we'll move on to extended maternity and paternity leave. Next slide, please. All right, so Vietnam has begun to become concerned about its declining fertility rate. In order for there to be a replacement level of people, there needs to be 2.1 children per woman. But recently, the fertility rate is at 1.93, and some provinces and cities have very low rates. So, go back, please. Could you go back to, thank you. So Vietnam has put in place a policy that basically provides incentives to couples to specifically have 2 children. So both men and women get extended parental leave for their second child, only the second child. So for the third or fourth child, no special benefit. But if the kid is number 2, then they get slightly more leave. And I think the rationale behind this is just that the declining fertility rate might just be due to couples struggling with the burdens of child rearing. So it's trying to make it a bit easier for the parents. Next slide, please. All right, so the increase in leave is not dramatic. For women, it's 7 months for their second child. It's normally 6 months, so 1 extra month of leave. For men, generally, they're only entitled to 5 working days of paternity leave in the case of a normal birth. But under this new amendment, it's under actually the law on population, which kind of reflects the concern about the fertility rate. It's doubled, so it's 10 working days if it's their second child. Next slide, please. Okay, so another big issue that's come up for employers is dealing with employee consent under the Personal Data Protection Law. And this law came into effect January 1st of this year. Next slide, please. So these are some basic legal requirements. If an employer is interviewing candidates, it always needs their consent to process their personal data. In respect of employees, it needs their consent for activities not strictly required by law. And this is slightly different because in the case of employees, the parties will have a labor contract. And so some types of data processing may fall within one of the exceptions that I'll explain later. The employer may only process data for specific purposes, and they must delete data when it's no longer needed for the intended purpose. Next slide, please. So there's different obligations depending on the stage of employment. In respect to recruitment, only recruitment-related information may be requested. So what this means is you can't request information that's not directly related to the job. So for example, if you asked an employee about their marital status, Already under previous laws, it could be considered discriminatory, but now there would be the additional concern that it would violate the personal data privacy law. The employer must obtain the consent of the candidate before processing their data. And if the person isn't hired, the data should be deleted unless there's some agreement between the parties otherwise. During employment, before signing the labor contract, the employer should obtain the employee's consent for data processing during the employment relationship. So as I mentioned previously, there are some exceptions to consent. Consent is not needed in order to protect life, health, honor, dignity, or lawful rights of an individual in an emergency situation. So in the employment context, that would be something like if there was a workplace accident. The second exception is to protect one's legitimate rights or interests, those of others, those of a state or organization against unlawful infringement. So this could be the type of case where maybe an employee was sending defamatory emails about the company to customers or about other employees to third parties, something like that. The third exception is to fulfill agreements made between the candidate or employee with agencies, organizations, or individuals as required by law. So in the employment context, this would mean basically like sharing the employee's information with the social insurance authority or tax authority. But one thing to keep in mind is the employer will always bear the burden of proof if they intend to rely on an exception. And this law is new. The PDPL just came into effect January 1st. So exactly how it will be interpreted by authorities is not really known yet. And courts in Vietnam tend to be very pro-employee. So it's recommended to get that employee consent and to make it extremely broad for all the purposes instead of trying to rely on an exception later. Post-termination, basically personal data should be stored for the period required by law or as agreed. And any data that's not required to be kept by law should be deleted or destroyed unless there's some other agreement. Next slide, please. So just to kind of illustrate the difference in the law, I'll tell you a little bit about a case from actually a long time ago. This case was heard by the court in 2012, I believe. It's a long time ago. And it just shows how the law in respect to employee consent has evolved. Next slide, please. So this case involves an engineer for Toyota named Lê Văn Thich. And in 2011, he alleged that there were technical defects in the vehicles. The company interpreted this differently, and they said that he was harassing the general director by sending him constant emails. There was a dispute between the parties, and it ended in Lê Văn Thich alleging that Toyota had been improperly monitoring his work email. They went through his work email account, and as a result, some very embarrassing personal emails came to light. Back in 2012, the court said that because the company owned the domain name and the workplace email inbox, and in addition to that, in the internal labor regulations, it stated the work email was only to be used for business purposes, that the company had the right to monitor it, and that since the employee was using employer-owned equipment to transmit the messages, this was his implied consent to the employer monitoring. But the law has changed, and an employer would no longer have this right automatically. The employer would only have this right if you look back to those exceptions I mentioned. And in a case like this, maybe they could argue that he was trying to violate the company's legitimate rights and interests contrary to the law. But as I mentioned, employers would always have the burden of proving that the exception applied, and the courts are generally very pro-employee. So this previous approach of just assuming that it's like a work email inbox and the employer can monitor whatever it likes, that cannot be applied anymore. Next slide, please. Instead, you need employee consent. And basically, it needs to be voluntarily given and informed. So these consent forms include a lot of information. Basically, the employee needs to be informed of the processing purposes and the data types. Basic personal data is basically information that makes an individual identifiable, that's used kind of commonly in transactions and social relations. Sensitive personal data is data closely involved with the individual's privacy, and this infringement may have big impacts on them. So things like financial information, health information, sexual orientation, things like that. Processing purposes need to be informed to the employees, and the employee has to give consent to each of the purposes, and it cannot be tied to mandatory conditions, because as I mentioned, it needs to be voluntary. The employee also has to be informed of the identities of the data controller or data controller processor. The data controller is the party that is instructing how the data will be processed, and the processor is the party actually doing it. So often the employer holds both roles. They are the data controller and processor. The data subject also has to be informed of their rights and obligations, and they need to be informed if there is any cross-border personal data transfer. Next slide, please. The other thing about consent is it must be explicit and verifiable. Silence does not constitute consent. It has to be expressed clearly in a format that can be printed or copied in writing, or in an electronic or other verifiable format, such as a phone call or text message. But you need some kind of recordable proof that the person has consented. And the other important point to keep in mind is that the data subject can withdraw their consent at any time. So it's valid until it's withdrawn. So that can also be a tricky point for employers. Okay, and that is the end of my part.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for such a great presentation about all of the new things have been applied and will be applied in the future, especially in the workplace as well. So I'd like to just briefly summarize very short content about the presentation is about. So your presentation is updating about the salary related. The new salary range will be applied in 2026, and also the very important point, which is the application for electronic labor contracts as well. This will be the point that our audience will be asking a lot of questions, because this is new and this is very important for all of the business industries to apply it as well. So I hope we'll get some Q&A after this related to the e-contract. And another updates from your presentation is about the extended maternity and paternity leave, as well as employee consent under the PDPD law. Yeah, so this presentation has covered a lot of practicals and also the compliance updates applying for the workforce in Vietnam. I would like the speakers welcome all of the audience as well. Stay on the line, and after this we'll go to the Q&A section, because I know the workforce related to employers is such a tropical topic. Yeah, it related to your core business. So I would love to welcome as many as Q&As as possible. So before that, I guess we also have collected some Q&A before. so that I would love to speak it out for our speakers to answer. Could I get the next slide, please? Right. So this is the first question that we have collected during the registration. So for the employees under probationary contract and resigned employees whose salary is paid after the contract end date, should PIT be withheld at the progressive tax rate or at the fixed 10% rate? Should non-taxable income be excluded before applying 10%? So please allow me to direct this question to one of our speakers today, to Jack, please. Would you be answer the question?
Yeah, the good question. The answer is on a probationary contract, it would be a fixed 10% rate. Okay, so regardless of income, it'll be a fixed 10% rate
Right,
for
yeah,
PIT withheld.
yeah, sure. This is a straight answer from Jack. Next question, please. Can organization build up and implement a contract themselves without vendor? How to ensure the legality of e-contract implemented by the organization? So for sure, this question will be directed to Sarah, please.
Okay. So no, an employer cannot implement the system themselves. They need to engage a licensed vendor. The vendor needs a special license for the provision of trust services because the employer cannot authenticate its own e-contract. It needs the vendor to do that. And only an entity with this special license can do that. It also needs to have special capabilities to do the application programming interface. So basically, it needs to have a high level of data security so that it can sync with the National Electronic Labor Contract Platform. So it's necessary to engage a licensed
Yeah,
provider.
especially related to the PDPD law, right?
Yes, to make sure you don't have issues coming up from that.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Next question, please. Another question for the labor contract. So, is DocuSign legally valid in Vietnam for signing labor contract and relevant documents, employment documents?
No. No,
This is a
unfortunately,
straight answer.
DocuSign is not a licensed digital signature provider, so it can't be used. So some of the ones I mentioned earlier, like Viettel -CA, FPT-CA, CMC-CA, it has to be one of these Vietnamese licensed digital e-signature providers.
Yeah, sure. That makes sense because those organizations will have a proper data to protect the employees as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So next question, please. We also received a couple of live questions today. So I would like to go through the first one. So electronic LC is mandatory for all of the company. If a company has less than 50 employees, is it okay to continue with the paper contract? Over to you, Sarah.
Oh, so e-contracts are not mandatory right now. So the new law that came out, Decree 337, it encourages the use of e-contracts as much as possible, but you are still allowed to use paper contracts. And there's no specific employee threshold for this determination. So right now, a company does have the freedom to continue to use paper contracts if it prefers.
Oh, great. Thank you, Sarah. Next live question would be, how can an expat internal transfer proof for the deduction amount outside Vietnam when some agency overseas do not have equivalent documents? And if yes, they're written in another languages? I would like to direct this question to Jack, please.
Yeah, Ngan, can you read that question again?
Yeah, sure.
I don't see it.
So how can an expat internal transfer proof for their deduction amount outside of Vietnam when some agencies overseas do not have equivalent documents, or if yes, are they written in another languages?
Yeah, that's a bit tricky, and I'm not sure I have the right answer right now. I would suggest that and you need to understand, talk to experts, consultant, because we need to see all the documents that you have, what languages, who the agencies are, what documents you have, what documents are missing, so that we can advise you accordingly on this matter. It's hard to answer fully, completely, accurately without a complete picture of who's involved, what documents are you have, and what you don't have.
So we would suggest to for this audience to write an email after this, or could you please, Ms. Nguyen Hanh or Mr. Nguyen Hanh, to drop us an email,
Yeah, drop an
so
email.
that we will be able to look into this matter and answer you accordingly during to after seeing the whole picture. Thank you, Ms. Hanh or Mr. Hanh, for this question. So let's move on to another question. So this question would be for Jack. I would like to clarify the tax treatment for payments made after an employee's last working day. Would 10% tax rate apply in all cases? For example, if the employee's LWD last working day is 20th of July, but the company process or pays the employee's final payment on the 25th of July, would the 10% tax rate be applicable to this payment?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, the 10% is still applicable to this payment.
Right, 10% short
Yeah.
answer. All right, thanks, Jack. We seem to have a lot of concern about the e-contract, Sarah. Yeah. Okay, so another one, which I think that related to the case study earlier that you gave it. So the question is, in order to handling the personal data of whistleblower suspected employees, witness in operation of whistleblowing channel, does the company need to get the consent each of the said data subjects?
So in the case you have, like, if data is anonymized, so for example, if the whistleblowing report doesn't have any identifying characteristics of a person, then consent is not needed because basically you can't identify who the person is. But if the report does include the personal information of the whistleblower, yes, to use that data going forward, you should obtain the consent of the person. It may be possible to rely on one of those exceptions that I mentioned. So for example, if it's to protect somebody's life or health in an emergency situation, or to protect someone's legitimate rights or interests where they might otherwise be infringed by someone else contrary to law, then if it's that type of situation where maybe someone's safety is in danger, or if it involves maybe a crime or something impacting someone else, you might be able to rely on one of the exceptions. But the most prudent way forward would be to obtain that person's consent, because as I mentioned, we aren't sure at this point how the court would handle the exceptions or what they interpret as meeting the necessary threshold. So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. So I guess that this will be the last question direct to Jack, and that will be, can an internal transfer expat sign a labor contract with a Vietnamese company?
Can an expat sign with the Vietnamese company?
Yeah, internal transferred. Yeah.
Internal transfer. Yeah, they can sign.
Oh, I can chime in on this
Sarah.
one.
Yeah.
No, they shouldn't, because
okay.
if they're signing with the company, because if they're a true intra-corporate transferee, then they should not be subject to social and health insurance contributions. But then if they sign the contract with the Vietnamese entity, then they will be subject to those statutory contributions. And if they got their work permit as an inter-corporate transferee, and then they sign a labor contract with the local entity, it could also invalidate the work permit because it would have been obtained under the wrong ground.
Yeah, so how would we answer this?
So you should not. No.
Should not, right? All
Yeah,
right.
thanks, Sarah, for a clarification.
Yeah, that's great. So is there any more question from our audience? I don't think that we have more comments on the chat box right now, or whether another Q&A need to be addressed. So all of the question and answer will be answered after the webinar, as well as the recording. Also, the presentations from the speakers will be sent to you after the webinar. So if you have any concern, any question need to be clarified, please reach out to us anytime.
Great.
And I would like either Sarah or Jack to close this webinar with thank you so much, Sarah and Jack, for being in the webinar, such a great speakers, and thank you so much for today's section.
Yeah, thank you, Ngan. Thank you, Sarah, on behalf of Ascentium. Thank you, everyone, for joining our webinar this afternoon. I hope the information provided was very useful, and please feel free to contact either Sarah at Tilleke Gibbins or myself at Ascentium if you have any further questions or clarifications you need to answer. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.